Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us at this session on reading and wellbeing experiences across the lifespan. I'm Becky and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the English Association, and I'm so pleased to be here with you this afternoon. A quick word about the EA. We are a learned society and a subject association which was founded in 1906 to promote, support and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education from primary and early years through secondary and further to higher education and beyond, and we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers, so thank you so much to Sarah McEwen and David Robinson for being with us this afternoon. We are so grateful. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fee. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. It costs from just £29 to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Right, that's enough from me. So it's my pleasure now to hand over to Sarah and David. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky, for that introduction. And I'm just going to check. Could you please let me know that everybody can see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us after the end of probably quite a busy work day for many of you. My name's Sarah McEwen and I'm co-director of the Literacy Lab based at the University of Edinburgh. And I was saying to Becky earlier that this is one of my favourite things to talk about, is the relationship between reading and wellbeing. And I'll be sharing some of the research today where we've looked at the relationship between reading and wellbeing across the lifespan. And I'm joined today by David Robinson, who's a secondary English teacher, who'll be focusing more on his professional expertise in terms of supporting wellbeing through reading among young people. So in terms of the research, I'm going to very briefly look at the evidence base. So that is large-scale quantitative studies which have looked at the extent to which there's a relationship between reading and well-being, before going on to share some of my own research, which has been qualitative research, aiming to deepen and expand our understanding of the different ways in which fiction book reading may be able to support our well-being. And then after that, I will hand over to David, and then we'll give some further reading and resources at the end in case you're interested. Now, as we're speaking, if there's anything that comes up that resonates with you or that you'd like to share, please feel free to put it into the chat box. Similarly, if you have any questions, put those into the chat box too, and we hope to have time to come to those at the end. So in terms of the evidence base, I'm not going to go into these studies in a lot of detail, but just to say that there are a number of large-scale quantitative studies which have looked at the relationship between reading and well-being among children and young people. So research which has been carried out in the UK, in Australia and the US. And like Becky said, there'll be a copy of these slides available afterwards, and there's always links to the research as well, in case you'd like to follow up on those. But just to summarise some of the key findings that emerges from this research, what it tends to show is that there is a positive, statistically significant relationship between reading and well-being, although this relationship is very weak. And I think this at a population level, this is perhaps not surprising. Although reading may support well-being, for some children and young people, reading can be a source of anxiety, stress. Some can find reading boring. For others, they may be completely indifferent to the idea of reading as well. And so it's important to recognise that at a population-based level, we cannot say that reading supports all children and young people's well-being. And actually, a lot of my own qualitative research is aiming to deepen and expand our understanding of how reading can support well-being, in addition to doing research which seeks to increase children and young people's motivation and engagement in reading too. Now, the majority of research which has looked at the relationship between reading and wellbeing has been focused primarily on children and young people, but there is some research being carried out with adults too, and the Reading Agency has been leading on a lot of this work. And so this is just some recent research from the Reading Agency showing that we've got regular readers in pink, lapsed readers in dark blue, and non-readers in lighter blue. And you can see that those with kind of higher life satisfaction tend to be more regular readers, whereas those with lower levels of life satisfaction tend to be non-readers. But again, a weak relationship between them, because obviously everybody's experiences of reading are very different. What the Reading Agency also do is they ask, in what ways reading may be supporting their well-being as well. And we can see a range of different ways here, for example, improved health and well-being, better sleep quality, improved concentration, etc., etc. And this is perhaps quite a nice lead-in to the qualitative research that I'm going to be sharing today. So as I've said, the qualitative research that I'm doing is not setting out to look at whether there's a relationship between reading and well-being, but understanding more about the conditions and contexts in which fiction book reading may support well-being, and broadening our understanding of what we mean by well-being in relation to reading. The project that I'm going to share was one funded by the Leverhulme Trust. This was a large-scale qualitative study where we carried out interviews with children, young people, adults, and older adults. And the participants, or the people that we spoke with, were all readers, so people who enjoyed reading and chose to read in their free time. And what's interesting about this research project is that we asked exactly the same questions to all these different age groups to look at similarities and differences in terms of the reading experiences across the lifespan. Now, well-being is quite a complex concept, and we looked at well-being from two different perspectives. One is a hedonistic perspective, which argues that well-being is simply the presence of positive emotions, feelings of enjoyment, pleasure, joy, but also looking at well-being from a eudaimonic perspective. That is when well-being is seen to be more around realizing one's potential, finding meaning within life, feeling connected with others, and personal growth. And so what I plan to do today is to share the research findings from across the lifespan, drawing on some commonalities across all age groups to deepen our understanding of how book reading can support positive effect, feelings of connection, and personal growth as well. And just to say, there's links to a number of different research articles there too. So in relation to positive emotions, we know that fiction book reading can elicit a wide range of emotions. And as readers, we seek out different types of emotional experiences from the books that we read. So we found across the lifespan lots of examples of feelings of happiness, sadness, excitement, tension, nostalgia, hope. And we didn't necessarily find differences in different age categories, but rather we found that there was diversity within each age category as readers sought out different types of experiences from books. You will see that not all of the experiences were necessarily positive emotions, such as readers spoke about feelings of tension, unsettling emotions, feelings of sadness. But readers often spoke about these negative emotions as being quite enjoyable. And we know as readers ourselves, sometimes we're drawn to books which can sometimes elicit quite unsettling feelings or feelings of sadness as well. And often these are the books which are often sometimes more transformative within our life, or books in which we're able to better find sort of meaning. While we were interested in how reading itself can elicit emotions and the emotions experienced during reading, we also saw examples of emotions being felt before and after reading as well. So in terms of emotions before, readers often spoke about being in the mood to read or not, or being in the mood for a specific type of book. We all know that reading can be quite a sustained cognitive activity. Sometimes we need to feel well enough in ourselves in order to read. So it's not simply the case that reading supports well-being, but sometimes we need to have a certain level of well-being in order to engage in reading in the first place. And finally, readers also spoke about feeling emotions after reading as well, that sort of long-lasting, lingering emotional effect that a book could have, or if they recall to mind that book again at a later date. So it's not the case that the emotions are experienced only during the act of reading, but actually there can be emotions before and after reading, which can shape and sometimes enhance the emotional experience of a book. Readers also spoke about emotions being elicited as a result of the book content, for example, the characters, the story events, the settings. But books can also cue personal memories and the emotions associated with these. And many readers across the lifespan spoke about how some books, some characters, some story events have made them think about things within their own life and elicited emotions associated with these personal memories. And as readers, we bring so much of ourselves to the books that we read, these emotional and our personal memories, our background knowledge, our dispositions, in ways that can really shape and enhance the emotional experiences that we have with books. It's also important to point out that readers differed in their predisposition to seek out or engage in emotionally meaningful content. For some, fiction book reading was quite a profound emotional experiences at times, but for others, that wasn't necessarily the type of experience that they were looking for from books. And so for some readers, emotions didn't necessarily feature as heavily or weren't salient when they were talking about their experiences of reading. And just as I spoke about how as readers we bring a lot to the books that we read, readers also spoke about the role of the author and the quality of writing and the author's craft in the ability to elicit these emotional experiences as well. So a lot of the work that I do, which looks at qualitative research, is really about centering children, young people, adults' voices within the work as well. And so what I'm going to do now is just give a flavour of some of the different things that I've said, that was said by the children, by the young people, by the adults and older adults as well. And you may be able to see how some of these quotes map onto some of the themes that we've identified within our data. And maybe you're all at this point sort of able to think about books that you've read yourself and maybe some of the emotions that may have been elicited from that. And what we found from the interviews was that it wasn't necessarily the emotions elicited at that point of reading, but also sometimes reflecting back on what was read as well. And one of the things that we're really interested in is reflective reading practices now, both at the point of reading, but also after reading, and the ways in which these may be able to enhance our reading experiences. Okay, moving on now to the concept of connection. As I said, this also features within our understanding of well-being in terms of finding a feeling of connection with other people. And one of the things that we found through the concept of connection was a sort of feeling of connection to the fiction world, but also transferring from the fiction world into real life as well. So as readers across the lifespan spoke about feelings of connection, many would talk about feeling connected to fictional characters. This happens in different ways. Sometimes readers spoke about feeling connection through similarity in life experiences and identities and beliefs and values and dispositions. And so readers felt this sense of connection in terms of seeing themselves and their own identity or dispositions reflected in what they read. Others spoke about just simply caring for characters, feeling like they'd gotten to know characters, and even though they were dissimilar in many ways, feeling a sense of connection and care for these characters. Readers also spoke about feeling connected to settings, particularly when these were seen to be accurate or authentic representations of settings through which the readers were familiar with. So they spoke about maybe reading books which were maybe set in a context that they were familiar with and enjoying seeing that sort of similarity and that accurate representation of a place that was dear to them. Readers also spoke about feeling connected to story events, and when we saw differences in this across the lifespan. And actually, one of the things which was often quite profound was when readers read something from a character who's maybe completely dissimilar to them, but they'd experienced the same thing, and actually how that helped us to understand our sort of shared humanity, that although we may be different in many ways, sometimes we share similarity in terms of our experiences. And again, we also saw through connection people sometimes being more interested in character-focused narratives as opposed to plot-focused narratives and vice versa. And again, this just highlights the importance of readers looking for different types of experiences from fiction books and being drawn to different types or forms of connection. And as I said, beyond this sort of feeling of connection to the fictional world, readers sometimes transferred this to real life others as well. So many readers, and this is again across the lifespan, spoke about how reading about characters within fiction books sometimes enriched their understanding of others within their life. These may be known others, it could have been classmates, friends, family members, other people that they knew, and perhaps developing a better understanding of the sort of attitudes, the behaviours, the beliefs of those other people through reading books where there was that sort of connection between the character and this person in their life. But we also know that books can expand our life experiences and introduce us to people, contexts, cultures that we would never experience otherwise. And so again, readers often spoke about feeling a connection to unknown others, people who they have never met and will probably never meet. But actually reading a fiction book helped them to develop an enriched understanding of those people and care for those people as well. And again, this is just some of the different things that were said from our readers. I think this is primarily from the children and young people, although I think there's one quote from an adult here. So I'll give you a little bit of time to look at that. And hopefully you can see within this, so this is a child talking here about sort of representation of their own experience within books. Here's another quote here from a child saying, you know, seeing how friendship is within a book helps them want to see that for themselves in their own life. Okay, and finally, I'm going to talk about the concept of personal growth. Now, of the three concepts, so positive emotions, connection, and personal growth, I would say it was probably the personal growth element where we saw the most difference across the lifespan. And so what I will do is talk to some of those differences now. So across the lifespan, we did see good examples and children, young people and adults talking about how they felt reading had supported their intellectual development, in addition to educational development as well. For a lot of children and young people, they often spoke about the sort of educational attainment and how reading was linked to sort of positive education outcomes, talking about things such as how they thought it helped shape their reading skills or how their language was better as a result of reading. Whereas adults and older adults tended to focus on kind of more broader cognitive abilities, and also spoke about how reading was able to support their writing or just their thinking and their broader knowledge and understanding of the world. Across the lifespan, we also saw different examples of how reading had supported their understanding of self. Just to give a couple of examples of the differences that we found, among the young people, we found a lot more examples of young people saying that they were reading in order to develop a better understanding of themselves and the importance of seeing themselves represented in what they read. And we know that adolescence is an important period of identity development as young people are beginning to understand themselves, make sense of who they are and their place within the world. And so that sort of seeing yourself in what you read was seen to be particularly important for adolescents. And perhaps less so for adults and older adults. Teenagers also spoke about how reading could help them with kind of future aspirations and the types of things that help them to think about the types of things that they might want to do when they're older as well. Whereas for the adults and older adults, in terms of supporting self, they often spoke about how reading had really shaped them as a person, developed them as a person, developed their empathy, their understanding of others, with very little, they tended to think less about how it was sort of developing their identities. As I said previously in relation to connection, fiction book reading can also enrich our understanding of others. It can give us access to people, places, cultures that we wouldn't experience otherwise. And this really came up in understanding others. And many spoke about empathy, although not necessarily using the term empathy. And we saw really good examples of both cognitive and emotional empathy. So cognitive empathy is basically our ability to understand things from others' perspectives, whereas emotional empathy is to sort of feel the same emotions that that character is feeling. And right across the lifespan, we saw examples of both cognitive and emotional empathy through the books that readers were choosing to read. And as I've already said as well, through reading, readers spoke about how it expanded their life experiences and gave them an insight and understanding, reflection that they maybe wouldn't necessarily get from other activities that they engaged in. So again, I'll just share some of the examples there. And again, these are from across the lifespan. And this quote at the end, I think for many of the children and young people as well, they spoke about how books gave them a sort of self-kindness and self-care, and to realise that maybe they weren't so alone as well, and sometimes supported a sense of belonging too. So just to summarise, fiction book reading can offer a wide range of rich and diverse positive emotional experiences, but it's important to recognise that readers seek out different types of experiences from the books that they read. And I also think it's important that for these wellbeing benefits to be realised, we can't say that this is happening for everyone. We really need to find books that we enjoy reading and engage deeply with the books that we read as well. And as I said, a whole other sort of line of my research is looking at motivation and engagement in reading and how we can increase motivation and engagement. And we'll be giving another talk through the English Association next year on this. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass over to David, who will take control of the slides.
Okay, I think that's working. Everybody hear me okay? Hi, so thanks very much to Sarah and to Becky and the English Association for inviting me to join you this evening, and thank you for everybody that's out there listening. So my name is David Robinson, and I currently work as an English teacher here at George Heriot School in Edinburgh, which, as you can see, although it doesn't look like that quite now, like that at the moment, but it has got one of the most fantastic views from any classroom window. But not quite as great as the view I had in the school that I attended when I was growing up, which is Lochaber High School, the most scenic school in Scotland, up in the Scottish Highlands in the shadow of Ben Nevis. I've had a really rich and varied teaching career that's taken me from Japan to China to Melbourne and to Hong Kong, teaching in international schools with a mixture of English language and literature all across the world. But today I'd like to take you back more than a decade to what was, without doubt, the worst day of my teaching career. So this was a normal Monday morning. I turned up for school. I accompanied my tutor group down to a morning assembly. And as I was sitting there, the headmaster came out onto the stage and he looked much more serious than he would normally, even on a Monday morning. And he suddenly announced to all the students from year 7s right the way up to year 13s that over the weekend, one of their fellow students had taken their own life. Now, hopefully this is something that none of you will ever have to experience. If you do, it is, I think, sort of generally advised that you don't announce this in an assembly. But I think the headmaster knew that this news was already circulating via text messaging and whatnot, and he wanted to get ahead of the curve with that. So all sorts of reactions flared into my mind, but as a teacher, you know, you've often got to think about the thing that's coming next. So my initial response was to start thinking about what was I going to do with the class that I was teaching just 3 minutes later. So basically I had the time from the end of the assembly to walking up to the classroom to try and work out what I was going to do, which was a double period with year 7, where I think we'd planned to do a sort of spelling or punctuation lesson, something sort of fairly standard, but not something that was going to work in a situation for a lot of young people for whom this was their first experience of death, or if they had experienced it before, maybe only through an elderly relative or through on something in a movie or a film. So yeah, we hadn't sort of conceived of them confronting their mortality first thing on a Monday morning. So in those 3 minutes walking from the assembly to the classroom, I started to rack my brain about what I could do. And I remembered a book that I had been studying the previous year. Unfortunately, the book cupboard was in my classroom, so I was able to take that book out. So what I decided to do was to start reading that book together with the class. And that book was this one here. There's 3 different covers for it. So it's a book called Ways to Live Forever, which is by an English writer called Sally Rooney. And the setup for the book is it's all written from the perspective of a boy called Sam, a fairly average 11-year-old boy in England. And the book is a collection of lists. It's got stories, there's pictures, there's questions, there's facts, all seen from the perspective of Sam. But the difficult part about it is that Sam has got leukemia and he's given a prognosis, which means he's only going to have a few months to live, to the point where he won't be able to actually finish the book. Now, this sounds like incredibly dark by itself, but the book itself is a fantastically life-affirming book. And every student that I've ever shared it with has absolutely loved it. It tackles some really difficult questions. Why does God make kids ill? Why do people have to die anyway? But it takes those questions, and these are questions that I think people, as like year 7, year 8 students, are starting to think about themselves, but it deals with them in a really funny and sensitive and really engaging way. It's not a religious book, but it does explore different ideas about spirituality as well. You've got this great list in the book where Sam lists all the things that he'd like to achieve before he passes away. And he's got everything everything from breaking world records, going up and down, down escalators and down up escalators, to being a teenager, doing teenage things like drinking and smoking and having girlfriends. So don't want to spoil it for you, but he does manage to achieve all those things before he passes away, but you'll have to read the book if you want to find out more. So this book, I think it worked really well in what was a really devastating situation. And I know the students were talking about it with their classmates, and other teachers took a real interest in the book as well. So I think it helped the young people to process what was probably one of the most difficult days of their education. And I think for me as well, it helped me to think about how can I talk about mortality with young people in that situation. So this brings me to what I think is a really important question that we consider about the purpose of books and literature in schools, which is about the ideas and experiences that books can explore that we can't really explore in any other medium. So we're currently going through what's been sometimes called a crisis in English studies. You might have seen news about the drop in applications to study English at university and A-level English dropping down. And I think this is really, really interesting. It's often attributed to people wanting to go and study STEM subjects instead, with an idea that by focusing on maths or science or technology, that's going to lead to a good career. Now, that's really interesting, and I'm sure there is some truth to it. But one thing I find really interesting is that as much as English is dropping down these levels, if we have a look at what's going up, the second most popular A-level in the UK today is psychology. And psychology is equally popular at university entrance as well. And I think that's really interesting because I think that some of the motivation that takes people to study psychology is the same impulse that can take us into reading books, particularly fiction and literature. So just from my own personal experience, I actually went to university to study psychology, but at the end of my first year, I flipped over to English, as I just felt it gave me a deeper insight than, no offense to psychology, but the studies I was doing at the time. And if we go back before psychology was an academic discipline of itself, a lot of the issues that psychology deals with were already being explored through novels and plays and poetry, whether that's Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex, which Freud famously picked up on to invent the Oedipus complex, or, I mean, Shakespeare's plays, whether it's Lady Macbeth or Hamlet, is all about the exploration of psychology. And even if you look at poetry like the Romantics, like Wordsworth, we think is exploring the effects of the natural environment on our minds. So I think in many cases, literature was there before psychology was. And in some cases, in ways that psychology can't enter. So I'd just like to recommend a book linked to this topic called Proust Was a Neuroscientist. So it's by a journalist called Jonah Lehrer. Now, I would like to disclose Jonah Lehrer was sort of one of the first sort of major cancellations about a decade ago. He was cancelled not for his behavior, but for plagiarism. And the plagiarism was linked to his subsequent books that he wrote and not to this particular book. But I think sadly, the sort of the accusations against him has undermined what I think is a really interesting book. So the background to Proust was a neuroscientist is that art and literature has explored concepts that psychology picks up on later on. So it does it through various different poets and novelists. I think Walt Whitman's in there. Proust, the French novelist, is in there and explores the idea of Proust with the Madeleine cake and how that triggers childhood memories. I'll just stop talking for a second so you can read that quote on the left. Okay. Yeah, I really recommend the book, but it made me think about books that we can use in school, whether that's in lessons or trying to encourage in library periods and other forms of independent reading, that really books that work as books, that the film version doesn't embody the same ideas that the book does. So 4 books that I think live in letters that I would recommend. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with Wonder by R.J. Palacio. I've really noticed that young people engage with this book so much, and I think a big reason for that is with the multiple perspective narrative that works in the book. So it really definitely works for young readers about thinking about people around them. I'd also highly recommend Kwame Alexander's The Crossover, which is a great story. It's a verse novel all about a young African-American boy who's a talented basketball player. He's navigating all the difficulties of adolescence, and at the same time, his father's experiencing declining health, and he has to deal with his parents' relationship and how health works, how health issues arise. If you're not familiar with Deborah Ellis's The Breadwinner, so this is Malala Yousafzai's, the Nobel Prize winner's favorite book. It's a novel set in Afghanistan when the Taliban were in charge back in the 1990s and early 2000s, before the Afghan war. And it's all about a young girl who has to disguise herself as a boy in order to leave the house and to provide for her family. So it's a great story of resilience, and it really exposes us to what things that are happening in the world. And I think many people might be familiar with My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, which is all about a young boy whose elder sister has been killed in a terrorist attack. And it's all about how the long-term effects that this has on the family and how they eventually come to terms with that situation. I'm currently doing a graphic novel club in the school that I'm in. So I just wanted to shout out a couple of really great graphic novels. Stories Born in Boxes was how I described it, which I think also tie into these ideas of psychology and have been super popular with a lot of students that I've worked with. So Anya's Ghost by Vera Broskell. It's all toxic friendships, but it's all explored through a supernatural story with Russian elements. Vera Broskell is a great writer. Roller Girl by Victoria Jameson is all about personal transformation and growth inspired by sport, specifically roller derby. Brina Telegamaya's Smile is super successful, all about dentistry and then how that links into sibling rivalry. And then finally, Jean Luen Yang, Chinese-American author's book, Boxers and Saints, which is 2 books in 1 volume, which are kind of about spirituality, radicalization, and violence. And it's set in 19th century China. It's a really interesting historical perspective. And these are all books I've picked up on because students really like them. And in particular, I've picked up on them because these are books that I've experienced through a thing called Battle of the Books. So if you've not heard of Battle of the Books, it is a school competition, which I think originates in America, but it's really common in international schools that I've seen, particularly in Beijing and in Hong Kong. So the basic setup of it is that school librarians around a city, in my case is Beijing and Hong Kong, get together and decide on a list of 20 books that they'd like schools to promote during the year. Within the schools, you form a team and you get, usually as a lunchtime or after school activity or sometimes in library periods, those students get together. They can choose which books from the list they want to read, and they can choose the order in which they read them, and they get together and they talk about them. And it leads towards competitions. So sometimes intra-school competitions within the school so that they're competing with each other, and sometimes inter-school competitions. It was really great in Beijing because we had 3 competitions over the course of the year that gave us time to build up the books. And then with the results from the competitions, this results in lots of awards and recognition for reading. So I find it's a super engaging way for students to experience a much wider range of books, to talk about them, and to get recognition for the reading that they're doing as well. For me as a teacher, it was really helpful because it exposed me to all kinds of books that I might not have been able to come across. So I think all the books that I talked about there, I learned about through Battle of the Books. And a long time before they took off. So I was sort of hearing about Wonder not long after it had been published as well. So I think it turns reading into something that's aspirational, something social, fun, exciting, and worth being rewarded for. So I think another question I'd just like to ask is, like, how can we use social connection like clubs, competition, and then recognition to support reading? And it's also something I'm really disappointed. I returned to the UK in 2022, and I've been trying to find something like the Battle of the Books. And I may have missed it, but I'd be really interested to know if anybody knows of something like that or would be interested in starting something like that up. Which leads me on to one bigger question, which is about how we choose books. I think many of you might be familiar with readers who get stuck on certain series or certain writers. I know even into sometimes S1 or S2 or year 8 or year 9, you can sometimes see if there's an independent reading period, people are pulled back to David Walliams or Wimpy Kid and Dogman. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong with those books. I don't want to denigrate them, but I think it's just a sign that people are not pushing themselves forward with it. And I think it links into this idea of the paradox of choice. When you're put into a library with thousands of books, quite often that number of books can be overwhelming and you'll end up going to the thing that you're safe and comfortable with. I think it's the same reason that McDonald's or Starbucks are popular as well, because people go with something that's safe and reliable rather than wanting to take a risk. And I think one of the ways we can get around this is by still maintaining choice, but narrowing that choice in some way. One way in which I've tried to do this myself is sort of linking it into certain events that are happening in the school calendar. One good example would be World Poetry Day. So what I try and do around World Poetry Day is bringing a big list of poetry books And students still get to choose the book that they're reading, but it would be from this narrower field of poetry books, which is often the shelf that people ignore or walk past or don't pay attention to when they're going around the library. And I mean, there's some fantastic books on that list there. I think a lot of people might be familiar with The Final Year by Matt Goodfellow, or its sequel, The First Year, which just came out quite recently, which is all about the transition from primary school into secondary school. Likewise, Everything All at Once by Steve Camden is also about getting used to secondary school. So a great book to encourage students to read, at the start of their secondary careers. And they're also super accessible, short, and often funny as well. So they can make a great replacement or addition to kids who've got stuck on Wimpy Kid or other places like that. Just wondering if anybody knows what those books all have in common. I'll give you a second. And the answer is, these books are all books that in previous years have been winners of the Clipper, the CLP Poetry Award. And I found it really useful to sort of follow a lot of the Young People's Book Awards, because it just puts on my radar, and then I'm able to use on other people's radars about books that I might otherwise not be aware of. And all these fantastic books here I know about because of those awards. Similarly, there's lots of other book awards that I think if you're not aware of, it's really good to try and just get onto your radar, whether that's the Excelsior Award for graphic novels and comic books, which last year was won by, I don't know if you can see it there, a brilliant graphic novel adaptation of Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which I've been reading with my own kids at the moment. The Royal Society, the Young People's Science Book Prize Award. You can see Adam Rutherford's Where Are You Really From book there, which is interesting for thinking about racism and identity. The Jalek Prize Award, which is an award for writers of color. And then finally, I think the Carnegie Award, most people will be familiar with. So I think it's really useful to either have a dedicated section in the library for those award winners, or to try and bring them into lessons or school assemblies or school newsletters, or maybe school clubs that you have. So I just wanted to finish up by asking, how can we encourage young people, and perhaps ourselves as well, to be more ambitious and varied with our reading? Thank you.
David, do you want to move on to the next slide now? I think, do you have a few more just to finish up? Yeah. So next slide, sorry.
Sorry.
No? Okay, perfect. So David and I are just going to signpost the different types of resources if you're interested in following up on any of this afterwards. In terms of some of the research that I shared, there's a link there to the Literacy Lab, and I think that will go out as well when you get a copy of these slides. But within the lab, we've got copies of our research articles, we've got short online articles and blog posts. We've also created this reflective reading guide, which encourages readers to reflect on their own reading experiences through the lens of positive emotions, connection, and personal growth. And we've also carried out a number of different author events, so with Val McDermott and Jackie Kay so far, where we've put these questions to them and we've encouraged them to reflect on their own experience as readers through the lens of positive emotions, connection, and personal growth. And some of the quotes that I shared there you'll find embedded within these articles. Next slide. Oh, can you go back one? I think is the one. Oh no, okay. Sorry. Just to say as well, I think I forgot to share that slide, but we've got another event later this month with Graham McRae-Burnett, who will also be talking with through, again, the same type of event. And I'm happy to share details of that if helpful. Also, just talk really briefly about a paper that we published a couple of months ago. This is called The Future of Books and Reading. Now, as a lot of you will probably be aware, there's been quite a sort of negative narrative about where we are in the UK in terms of reading enjoyment and engagement. So the National Literacy Trust is an organisation that I work closely with, and they've been tracking reading enjoyment and engagement over the last 20 years. And what we've seen is quite consistent declines in the number of children and young people who say they enjoy reading and choose to read in their own time. And similarly, the Reading Agency are pointing to quite low levels of reading engagement among adults as well. And so the Future of Books and Reading paper was really aimed to be a kind of positive and hopeful narrative to frame future thinking, discussion and action in relation to books and reading. We've shared a large body of research across 5 different themes. So the themes of enjoy, engage, empower, enrich and expand. It's different from a lot of the academic papers that are written in that this is a sort of more hopefully visually beautiful than many of the academic articles. And importantly, there's contributions from over 25 individuals towards this. So different individuals working across literacy, library, publishing, different sectors, sharing their own thoughts and opinions in relation to each of these themes. Next slide, David. And these are just some of the references that David wished to share in relation to the book recommendations. I know I'm probably going to be spending a lot of money after your presentation, David, because there are so many books that I want to read. But that's just a link to them afterwards so you can find them a little bit more easily. Next slide. And just say, yeah, thank you all for listening. And we do have a few minutes left for questions at the end. And David and I are both very happy for people to get in touch with us, to reach out if they've got any questions as well. But we'll just maybe pass over to the chat now and see if anyone would like to ask any questions. So just looking at the questions, I think the meeting will be recorded. Becky said that at the beginning, so you will be able to access a copy of the slides and also the recording as well. And in terms of Barbara's comments around practical ideas to support volitional reading and reading enjoyment, just to say that we'll be doing an event in February, again organised by the English Association. This will be in collaboration with the Scottish Book Trust, and this will be looking at research to inspire reading motivation and engagement among young people. So please do feel free to come along to that as well.
I can answer. So Anne White has said, I've just lost it. Hang on. Book recommendations for 16 to 18-year-old GCSE research students whose first love isn't reading. Might be a bit young for them, but Anthony McGowan's The Lark is the book that won the Carnegie Award a couple of years ago, which is fantastic. It's really short, and it's like it's a bit like Of Mice and Men, but if it was set with sort of teenagers in England. And it's one of, there's now 4 of them that all link together. And yeah, probably, yeah, it might be a bit young for 16 to 18-year-olds. I'll have a think for any more in a second. But Lark, Anthony McGowan, and all Anthony McGowan's other recent books. And they're all dyslexia-friendly books as well. So I'd recommend those.
I think there was a comment above as well. I think that was in relation to yours, David, about reading as being a social thing too. And again, I think it's about readers reading in ways which are sort of personally enjoyable and meaningful to them. One of the things that we found is that for some, they really love that kind of social element of reading, whereas for others, they prefer the sort of more individual element of it as well. So I think it's about recognizing the different ways in which we can enjoy books and reading. So I think that's really nice to point to the individual and the social. I know next year is the National Year of Reading, which I think we're all very excited about.
There's a question about how Battle of the Books work. So, yeah, so there's 20 books. I mean, the questions for them are often sort of like minutiae about the book. So they're sort of, which book does this character do that? And which book does this character this? Which sometimes it's a bit too, like you have to memorize details from the book. But it does mean that students have to read the books rather than just reading the Wikipedia page for them. But I think it could be more flexible than that. So yeah, 20 books over the course of a year. Students read as many as they can, and you hold a competition based with questions on the book. It does require a few librarians who are willing to read books and make up lists of questions that go with them. But it's very successful. As I didn't mention, actually, in Hong Kong, it's so big that all the English language bookstores have the Battle of the books on display at the front of the shop. So you see it all across the city. So it's a great way for publishers if they wanted to publicize their books as well.
I'm aware that we're sort of 2 minutes before the end, and I can see some more things coming into the chat, but I wonder, David and I are both happy for our email addresses to be attached to anything that's sent out to people attending. But I wonder if maybe, Becky, you want to close up for today so we finish at 5:30?
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah and David. I've been furiously taking notes throughout. It's incredibly useful. And I think what's really sticking with me is those quotes that you shared, Sarah, from the readers. I think we can probably all name a book that has lived with us since we read it. That really stuck with me. And David, thank you for all those book recommendations. That's like gold dust. Thank you so much. And one final thank you, and that's to everyone who has joined us here today for your brilliant questions. I will pass the chat along to Sarah and David, and I'll share their email addresses so you can get in touch with them and feel free to keep questioning them. So for now, thank you so much. And as Sarah said, we will have a further several handful of events in this series with Sarah in 2026. So keep an eye out for those. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.